Okachi Podcast.com.
Hey everybody, thank you for listening to us today. If you like the episode, if you love the episode, please share it with your friends. It's how we get the word out. It's how we get to continue this conversation that we're trying to have. Please share. Please share with your friends. Let your friends know. And leave your comments. We really depend on your comments. Do want to talk about the show a little bit. In the previous episode, we talked about our experiences living in El Salvador, and some of us, like myself, living in the country. Ron described his experiences visiting the country and working in the country. Juan described just visiting and his experiences with it. And we wanted to kind of pull it all together, and that's what this next episode is going to be like, just talking about those experiences, how those experiences have molded our lives, my life in particular. So I hope you enjoy it, and thank you for listening.
Okachi Podcast.com.
This particular show had a very unique feel to it, a very personal feel to it to me, just because of the first third of my life, the first 14 years of my life, living this life, and although it was a beautiful place where I grew up, El Golfo de Fonseca is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in my life, and as a matter of fact, to this day, when I need to recharge my batteries, I go back there and I go visit with my cousins in the islands of Zacatillo, Conchahuita, Mianguera del Golfo. It's a place that rejuvenates me, just brings me back. But living there and living in the type of poverty that we experienced, it's overwhelming at times because it was a really, really tough life. It was a painful life, physically painful. There's a very real pain to hunger and sickness. And we used to be sick all the time. When you're malnourished, you get sick all the time. So it's this dichotomy where you live in a beautiful place, yet you suffer. You suffer like third world people do. So as an adult trying to make sense of it is hard. Because it's what you are. Those are the formative years. How do you reconcile the type of life that we have now, where I can pretty much have everything I want? I can eat whatever I want. How do you reconcile this life with that past one? So I can't say that I wish I hadn't lived it, because that's what made me who I am, in a way. That's my base. And to this day, I always say, well, growing up in El Salvador, this is what used to happen. I compare things to this day. Every single day, I remind myself that I am from El Salvador, from a poor place. And that plays games in your head sometimes, because you almost feel guilty for where you are. As ridiculous as that may sound to some of you, it makes you feel guilty for having succeeded, because you know that there are still people living that life. And that life in itself is not a horrible life, because I could run to the beach and jump in it and take and bathe on the beach, then go to the little quebrada, the little creek, and take a shower before I went to school for a few hours and learned just the very basics. I got to run and swim every single day if I wanted to, go into the woods, what I used to enjoy doing, we used to sit on the beach and light fires and tell stories, and we tried to scare each other. We used to go to the soccer field. I remember one particular Christmas. Now remember, there was no electricity where I grew up. So I remember this one particular Christmas. We lived in front of the soccer field, so we could see the soccer field from our house. And all these kids came running to the soccer field with sparklers. And it was dark, right? When I say dark, you can't see your hand an inch from your face. So these sparklers just created this beautiful light. And all these kids were just jumping and running around the field with these sparklers and throwing them in the air. And little things like that stick in my head because it was just beautiful. It was so simple. So again, you have this simple, very simple world, but it's also a hard world where you have to be tough. Rocket Dalton writes about it, you know. He writes about this guy who had to kill because he had to kill, because he had a lice-infested heart. And there's a beauty in that. But there's also a sadness in that. And I think that I should start drinking tonight. Because it's making me emotional, and perhaps it shouldn't. Perhaps it should. It doesn't matter. All I can tell you is that El Salvador is a hard, beautiful place. And if you want to experience life, true life, you can experience it all there. El Salvador, the country El Salvador, El Campo, is where people are made that sometimes they have to be hard, or you have to survive. But it's a beautiful place at the same time. So perhaps that's a perfect metaphor for life, but I'm not describing a metaphor at all. I'm describing what El Salvador is like. I'm describing what the country, especially the rural areas of El Salvador, are like. But I don't wish it perhaps on anyone, yet I'm not so sure that I would have it any other way. Because that's my essence, whether I like it or not. So I'm going to stop being feeling guilty about it. I'm going to celebrate it, and I'm going to tell you that it's okay. I don't know how old I was. Maybe I was 10, between 7 and 10 years old. My dad had joined the military because he was in the war with Honduras. So he had military experience. So when the Civil War broke out, they called him back. And he went back to the ranks, and he was given the title or the rank of a sergeant. Eventually, my dad became what was called in El Salvador, and I'll say it in Spanish first, and then I'll tell you in English. It was called El Comandante Local, which is the equivalent of the local commander. And it usually was a rank of a sergeant who was put in a small village or a town and was given a civil militia type of thing. But most of that militia included guys who may have a gun that didn't work, or a machete or something like that. But they patrolled the village, and somehow they became, well known in some areas more than others. But in my village, my father was a local commander, so he was the representative of the army within our village. And one day, all these lieutenants and colonels came to our village, and they came to the beach, and they brought steaks with them, which is a very rare commodity in a small village where we grew up. We had meat maybe 5 times a year, maybe a little more. It's been a while. But I remember these guys brought steaks, but they were like, there were steaks that still had the bone in them, right? But it was a status symbol for someone to eat steak without the bone. I don't know if that's still the case, but I remember. So I remember them cutting the steaks removing them from the bone. So therefore, you were left with a bone that had some of the cartilage, the tough part, and they were eating it. They were just eating the steaks, and they left the bones. But at the end of the day, my father took those bones to our house, and my mom made a meal of it. So here we are, kind of chewing on these bones. And to me, that was a perfect metaphor for what El Salvador was at that point, especially. The military always got to eat well, got to have money, got to be paid. And here we are eating these freaking bones without meat, technically, just chewing on whatever we could. And for so many years, that made me really sad. How is it that we're eating the freaking bones when these motherfuckers get to eat the meat, the steak? But I've been thinking about it lately. I've been thinking about it a lot. And I credit my wife, Rachel, and meditating and just trying to be gracious, trying to have gratitude for whatever you are given. And I was thinking, how many other people in that village, and there were about 300 of us in El Chiquirin, Caserío El Chiquirin, Cantón Agua Escondida, Departamento La Unión. And I'm thinking, how many other people were eating as good as we were eating that day? And I can tell you with complete certainty that there may have been 2 other families that were eating better than us. And all we were eating is bones. But we ate better than a large majority of the people in that village. So again, it's giving me a different perspective, and I'm not asking anyone to feel bad for us because we were eating those bones, because there were a lot of people who were better off. It's very much relative, but at the end of the day, that has just given me the perspective that perhaps I need to be gracious for that experience. Just be gracious for having lived that life, because that gives me an appreciation for what I have now. And somehow that has allowed me to have less guilt for being where I am today. So at the end of the day, wherever you are, whatever your situation is, just be gracious for what you have. Because I can assure you with complete certainty that there's somebody who has a lot less than you, who is very happy with very little less than what you have. And there's somebody who may have a lot more than you and be a lot more miserable than you are. Just be gracious. Gratitude is going to take you many, many places. It's going to take you far.